Who's the worst, most despicable person you can think of? Jeffrey Dahmer? Ted Bundy? Luis Garavito? Pol Pot? Of course, you could make your own arguments for any one of them, or anybody else for that matter. Yet, all of these people have one thing in common. They're human. Preposterous people trying to act like monsters, either due to lofty, ridiculous ideals or some primal urge to revolt against society as a whole. It's quite the bizarre phenomenon. Yet, none of these admittedly sick people have truly fallen into the abyss. Perhaps they've stared down into it, dipped their feet in, but none of them have taken the plunge as a whole. Despite their efforts, they weren't able to separate themselves from their inherent humanity. But that's a good thing. They were relatively easy to take down. The bad news is that every once in a while, special cases will arise. In our circles, we call these individuals the void people, or just the voids. Individuals so far gone that they can hardly be considered humans anymore. The cause behind entities like these? Well, I wouldn't know. Nobody really does. Maybe they were born with that latent potential. Maybe they underwent some obscure supernatural transformation. Maybe their experiments gone awry. Aliens from another planet. Shit, maybe they're literal demons from hell brought here by some fool who just had to conduct some fucked up ritual. Who the hell knows? The only detail that matters is the fact that they exist. And dealing with them is more than a bitch. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of max security prisons. Places where drug kingpins, terrorists, and prolific serial killers, etc. are sent. The place is meant to contain the worst amongst humans. Well, those are a joke compared to where the voids are kept. At a pair of undisclosed coordinates built in the underground of a tiny island somewhere deep in the Atlantic, there exists a prison unlike anything you could imagine. We simply call it the chasm, a penitentiary for pure, unbridled evil. A collective evil that would surely yield humanity's extinction in a couple of months if it were allowed to run rampant in the world. Let me emphasize this a bit further. The individuals that require being held there are not merely criminally insane, they are criminally absolutely out of this universe fucking bonkers. Of course, you wouldn't know about any of this. Why would you? The government would probably sacrifice 1,000 children before they'd divulge a single detail about the place to a person without high enough clearance. But you know, that's just how they are. Before I came, there were exactly 32 being confined there, save for 2 that were still being actively pursued through the Brazilian underground and Russian tundra respectively. That was about all of them in the world. At least, we assumed that was all of them. Can't be sure about anything these days. Each holding cell was fortified to hell, specifically designed to counter and contain the respective void they were holding. If they managed to escape, there were 8 drones armed with Gatling guns, blades, grenades, and rockets waiting for them within a larger chamber. If they managed to break through that, then 20 guards in mechanized suits would have to step in. However, everybody understood the futility of that protocol. Those guards were getting slaughtered in seconds, regardless of the void they went up against. Maybe minutes if they're really skilled. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure why any of us regular guards are stationed here at all. Bureaucracy, I guess? Who knows what the government's thinking? If the situation were to ever get too drastic, then there was really only one feasible countermeasure in place. A last resort, so to speak. The higher-ups would have to call in something known as Task Force Void Nova Hammer, or TFVNH for short. I've never seen them in action before, nor do I know much about them. Not that I really want to, though. If you ever find yourself witnessing them in person, then that must mean you're having a bad day. So why am I disclosing all of this uber-classified information that would either get me killed or thrown in the deepest hole conceivable for the rest of my short life? Well, I'd estimate that there's about a 90% chance that I'm going to die by the end of today. And even if I do make it out of this fiasco, my life's never really going to be the same. So fuck it. Here we go. My day started out more or less normal. I was part of the unit guarding somebody named Jim Henninger. Well, that was his real name. Doesn't evoke a lot of fear, does it? That's why he had to call him something else. Since he used to be some psychosurgeon or something, we've dubbed him the Surgeon. Really creative stuff, I know. Standing at 5,171 cm, 135 lbs, 61 kg, we were all required to memorize their physical stats. He doesn't look like much. However, if you ever find yourself in the same room with him, no matter how big and tough you are, you're getting dissected or something. The main danger surrounding him stems from the fact that he seems to be able to teleport on will. 1 second you'll be staring at his dark, lifeless eyes, and after one blink, he'll disappear in a cloud of black haze, only to end up breathing right down your neck. For that reason, there's gotta be at least 10 sets of eyes on his monitor at all times. There's no way around it. If he's not being watched, he will escape. He's also kind of unkillable. No matter how many bullets you put through his head or blades you plunge into his chest, the guy just won't croak. And once he gets a scalpel in his hands. Of course, he's just 1 out of 32, and comparatively speaking, on the tamer side. With that said, my guard shift ended without any incident. Routine stuff. Following that, I went on break in the lunchroom with my buddy Sandu. Our conversations were usually pretty dry, but at least I can talk to the guy. It's hard to get along with any of the other guards. They're all just weird in one way or another. Anyway, lunch was usually the most enjoyable part of a working day in the chasm. What I didn't enjoy was the blaring fucking alarm and deafening, repeating automated voice blasting the word breach that went off right as I was about to take my chili out of the microwave. I could see Sandu's face drop at the disturbance. "You're fucking kidding me," he mouthed. Now, I'd only ever experienced one minor breach up until that point, and it was from the surgeon. I guess none of us were paying any attention that day. He made it about 8 miles off the coast using a stolen boat, racking up a total body count of 145 in his wake. It took 3 full days to wrangle him back, and 4 more weeks to fix all the damage he'd done to the infrastructure. That was all just one prisoner. If we were dealing with 3 or more, then our combined efforts as guards wouldn't have stood a semblance of a chance. There had only ever been one major breach in the chasm's history, in which 8 voids had broken out nearly simultaneously. It was also apparently the only time that TFENH had to step in. This was all around 12 years ago, long before I became a guard myself. The aftermath of that? I don't have high enough clearance to know, but I'm willing to bet that it was nothing fun. We did have a breach procedure. It was a lengthy document outlining exactly what we were supposed to do and where we were supposed to go. I've read it before, and it's fucking garbage. It's essentially predicated on the idea that we're cannon fodder and that we're obligated to do whatever we can to contain the prisoners. If anybody actually followed the procedure, they'd die instantly. Well, what the hell are we supposed to do? Somebody asked. They only got shrugs in response. Except for Sawson, that is. I fucking hated Sawson. The guy seems to believe that his life's an action movie and that he's the invincible main protagonist. Our yell pussies, or what he screamed at the top of his lungs, with a stupid grin plastered across his face. We never get any fucking action. Let's fucking go. Before anybody could stop him, he picked up his rifle and swung the door open like the giant fucking dumbass he is. Since the alarm was blaring, we could hardly hear anything that was going on outside in the corridors. For that reason, we all rather shocked upon seeing Morgie the corgi standing right outside. Imagine some guy walking around wearing a dirty, giant, creepy dog costume. Now imagine that this guy is 7'218 cm, with a voice that's simultaneously deep, raspy, and childish. That's Morgie the corgi for you. I could see the bravado leaving Sawson's face the moment he laid eyes on the abomination in person. We'd only ever seen him through a screen before. Rough. I always hated it when people tried imitating dogs, but hearing it coming from Morgie was a bit different and a lot worse. Before Sawson could even put his finger on the trigger, his head was mashed into pulp. Morgie began pouncing on other guards, effortlessly crushing limbs with his oversized paws. He'd switch between running around on his feet and crawling on all fours. The last thing I saw before running out of the break room was Morgie forcing the remaining, horrified agents to play fetch with him using a stray arm. But of course, it's not like I managed to escape anywhere better. The entire place was in a fucking tizzy. The squad leaders were frenetic, attempting to scrap together some kind of suppression force. I couldn't understand why they were so delusional. Are we guards supposed to be badass? Fuck yeah. Due to our field prowess, we were specifically selected from the existing pool of CIA agents and military personnel to be dropped into this godforsaken place. Put us up against a trafficking militia, terrorists, etc., and we'll smoke them. But what we can't deal with are things that aren't supposed to exist in the first place. We watch creature features and slasher flicks with the inherent understanding that we're watching fiction, a type of visual catharsis for our inherent fascination with the dark and grim. It's not supposed to be real, and we have no idea how to act once we find it standing right in front of our faces. Not even us so-called elite agents. Like I said, I'm not sure why they even bothered keeping guards in the chasm to begin with. These were the thoughts that ran through my head as I bolted through the hellish corridors. At one point, I stumbled upon a crowd of guards leering over some rails. Shockingly, they didn't seem concerned in the slightest. "What the hell are you guys looking at?" I asked them. A guard I recognized as Fenton turned around. "This is gonna be sick," he grinned, gesturing for me to look below. I didn't even know where I was going, so I didn't realize that I'd wandered into the level right above the weight room. It was a sprawling gym with an abundance of the best equipment obtainable. But there was one guard that used it the most. Branko Petrovic, a Serbian-American whose oversized frame hardly makes any fucking sense. I swear, when I first met the guy, he couldn't have been over 7 feet. He's around 8 to 249 cm now. I'm not quite sure what kind of bizarre experiments they ran on him, but they sure as hell overdid it. Despite the alarms, he was in the middle of overhead pressing what appeared to be an ungodly amount of weight when one of the escaped voids wandered onto the weight room floor. It was Luz, standing at 6'188 cm, 205 lbs, 93 kilograms. Like all the other prisoners, the guy was a complete mystery. His mostly bare body was comparable to that of a bodybuilder's, save for the hundreds of gnarly scars decorating his skin. The more disconcerting part of his aesthetic was the fact that he only had one half of his face. The other half consisted of his exposed skull with some kind of red, electrical current running through his cranial bones. He had that same current running through his hands, which allowed him to savagely electrocute whatever organic material he touched, quickly rendering it into a pile of steaming black mush. I guess that my fellow agents didn't bother reading up on the prisoners they guarded, because Branko never stood a chance. It didn't matter if you were superior to Luz in terms of strength. One touch and you were gone for. The only practicable way to take him down was by using ranged weapons. And even then, that task was easier said than done. Branko grunted like the dumb meathead he is, before grabbing an Olympic weightlifting plate and chucking it like a frisbee at Luz. It connected, seemingly shattering his ribs, but it wasn't nearly enough to take him down. As soon as he rushed forward, the fight had been decided. Branko attempted to tackle him, a mistake so horrible that his whole body began twitching as his skin made contact with Luz's fingertips. The electricity spread through his giant frame, causing his vitals to shut down within seconds. In no time at all, he was reduced to a heaping mass of scorched flesh on the floor. He didn't even have time to scream. I could see the respective faces of my stunned colleagues drop as they witnessed what they likely deemed an improbable outcome. That's what they were. But truth be told, I was also an idiot for even bothering to stay. Not long after, the sounds of cracking bones and heavy footsteps began emanating from an adjacent walkway. Along with the rest of the agents, my gaze shifted towards what was sure to be another incoming menace. The locked, metal door to the corridor was suddenly dented from the other side. A big fucking dent, mind you. It only took one more blow to blast it off its hinges completely. Standing at 6'198 cm, 242 lbs, 110 kg, and arriving in a haze of blood, guts, and limbs was the slasher flick-esque killer colloquially known as Wirehead. In congruence with his name, his entire head, save for a single eye, was wrapped in rusty barbed wire. He wore a decrepit, old leather jacket and jeans, complete with a large pompadour on top, like an 80s or whatever high school delinquent. Everybody's main concern was the weapon in his hands, a large, iron bat wrapped in the same barbed wire on his head. If you didn't die from the impact, unlikely, the subsequent infection would surely get you. And don't ask us why we didn't take his weapon away when we contained him. We did. But somehow, someway, he got it back. These things really can't be helped. What the hell is going on? I thought. Breaches happened, sure. But it seemed as if every single fucking void had somehow escaped. How is that possible? In any case, I couldn't afford to think deep into it at the moment. As Wirehead began mowing down the mystified agents in his way, I found myself accidentally making eye contact with Luz from below. I nearly had a heart attack as I began pushing through the crowd. Even though I was implicitly certain of the fact that no other location within the chasm would have been much safer, I was still being driven ahead by my fight or flight responses, away from the immediate threat. It was kind of funny. I'd been through so many life or death experiences that my reaction to adrenaline coursing through my veins had been dulled. Well, it sure as hell got invigorated today. I guess that I wasn't paying enough attention to my surroundings, because right as I was about to climb a staircase, I felt an oversized arm slam into my chest, knocking me over in the process. I looked up to see another guard Cade leering down at me. Sure, I was happy it wasn't one of the voids, but Cade wasn't much more pleasant. "What you running for?" He shot me a smug grin. "This is a breach, isn't it? Why don't we do our jobs here and fix it?" "Oh, fuck off," I spat at him before trying to duck past. No luck there. He caught me by the collar and slammed me into a wall. He certainly had the weight advantage. Still, I didn't practice hand-to-hand combat just to be ragdolled by some asshole. I slammed my elbow down on his wrist, which managed to loosen his grip. I followed up with a knee to the stomach and then attempted to strike his neck, but then he caught my wrist mid-punch. "Nice moves," he said, in an obnoxiously sarcastic tone. He took his palm and rammed into my chin, nearly causing me to black out. In the meantime, Wirehead was getting closer. "Guess we'll have to take this up another time," he said. "Somebody's got to work around here." I had no idea what he was thinking trying to take on one of the voids, but I wasn't trying to see his delusions through in person. Still in pain from his palm strike, I pulled myself up and began running once more, all while the sounds of carnage escalated around me. But there was a glaring issue. I had no idea where I was going. The exits were surely going to be blocked off from the inside. Do we have some kind of safe room? I thought to myself. No, of course we didn't. We were entirely expendable. They 100% expected us to fight these things head on, even though there was zero fucking chance of victory on our side. There was only thing I could do here. Survive until TFVNH showed up. Obviously that wasn't any kind of guaranteed reprieve, but my options were slim. Nevertheless, something rather surprising transpired. Amidst the cacophony of frenetic orders from our superiors, a familiar voice snuck in through my radio. "Hey, Jason, you. Alive." It was Sandhu. I picked up my radio and isolated his transmission. "Yeah, where are you, man?" "Block C. Got lucky and found something weird. It might save us, though." "Come on." Obviously, there wasn't much information there, but it was better than running around aimlessly. Thankfully, Block C was fairly close, so I was able to make it without running into another void. However, when I got there, it was still as chaotic as ever. I swiveled my head around, trying to spot Sandhu. I yelled into my radio, but his response was drowned out by everything around me. As I searched, I began sensing a perplexing, sinister pressure that made it feel as if I were sinking into the concrete beneath me. I hardly had to guess the source. It was Diaxec 9287 cm, LBS, kg. The Axec was comparable in appearance to something you'd see in the corner of your room during sleep paralysis. A hulking, faceless figure wearing a sweeping black robe that jerked around in unsettling motions as he or she, who knows, walked. I wasn't sure how he actually killed people, mind you. As soon as anybody got within a certain distance to him, they'd freeze in place and begin bleeding from their eyes. And then, they'd just stay that way forever. Obviously, that wasn't something I was looking forward to. As I looked ahead, I could see some unfortunate guards already getting caught in his death zone. In an attempt to avoid a similar fate, I turned the opposite direction and began running. And then I nearly shit myself. Standing about 10 feet away was the undead Nazi 5, 173 cm, 143 lbs, 65 kg. His name essentially told it all. A man wearing a dirty and tattered SS uniform with a cracked gas mask covering his face. In one hand, he gripped his signature Kampfmesser 42 blade that was inexplicably unbreakable, no matter what the hell we tried doing to it. In the other, he held a flamethrower hose connected to a massive tank on his back, which sprayed out some kind of scorching, black flame that would supposedly yield pain beyond comprehension if you were ever to come into contact with it. You could say that I was stuck in between a rock and a hard place here. The only other way out was taking the plunge over the rail in front of me, onto massive scrambling bodies 50 feet below. Before I considered simply saying my prayers, I felt a hand tug at my sleeve from the side, giving me another heart attack. But this time, it was good news. For once, I looked over to see Sandu poking his head out from what appeared to be some kind of hidden door in the wall. "Let's fucking go," he whisper shouted, before pulling me in. He closed the door behind him, plunging us into complete darkness. "What the hell is this place?" I asked. Hardly expecting a detailed response, Sandu illuminated his face using his phone's flashlight. "Couldn't tell you, but it's kind of fucking crazy." I could hear the Nazi beginning to spray his flamethrower from out in the corridor. I suddenly wondered whether or not Diaxic's power would apply to other voids. In any case, it was better not to be in such close vicinity to them, so I followed Sandu. He led me down some kind of hidden hallway. The walk was rather long, maybe around 8 minutes, and I eventually found myself in what appeared to be some kind of surveillance control room. It was still dark, but there was an array of monitors giving off enough light to comfortably navigate around. But here's the strange thing. The place looked kind of haphazard. No chance it was being used by the higher-ups. The monitors were scattered around, connected by a mess of wires to multiple outlets spread throughout the room. There was also only one chair. "I guess this is beyond explaining," I said. "Yeah." "No shit," Sandu replied, before gesturing towards the monitors. "Check it out." What the fuck did we just find? I took the suggestion, letting my eyes drift over to the screens. What I saw would have been normal in any other scenario. Each monitor was streaming a different section of the prison, all displaying the utter carnage that was going on outside. The guards were being ripped to shreds. Some tried fighting. Most were running. But what they had in common was the fact that they were all being utterly obliterated by the voids. I could see the surgeon giving somebody a forced lobotomy, grinning like hell while doing so. At the same time, Mordy was chewing on a severed head like a toy. But then I caught something interesting on a screen below. It was Wirehead and Luz staring each other down. That's when a rather obvious revelation hit me. Of course, the voids weren't only going to kill the guards. They were sure as hell going after each other as well. That much should have been apparent from the beginning. I grinned, feeling some kind of obscure hope creeping into my system. That hope was only bolstered when I saw the Nazi utterly dousing Diaxic with a relentless wave of black flames, with the latter struggling to move forward as a result. Guess these bastards can be hurt after all, I thought to myself. But of course, my hope was merely transitory. I wasn't going to kid myself. Even if only one void was left standing at the end of everything, that just means it'll be the strongest one out of them all, and we can't stay in here forever. At this point, my future is uncertain at best. Maybe I'll get lucky, probably not. But in the meantime, I suppose I'll enjoy the show, see how things turn out. This place sure gives you the creeps, doesn't it? I couldn't disagree with Sandu's assessment of the bizarre room we found ourselves in. The monitors only illuminated the area up until a certain point. However, we couldn't see any walls, which meant the place had to be bigger than what could be seen, either by a little or a lot. We couldn't know unless we decided to venture further into the darkness. Neither of us took that initiative though, keeping it a mystery. Still, it didn't feel like anybody was in there with us, so we allowed ourselves to relax a bit. I took the first sitting shift, lying back in the chair and focusing on the monitor that I deemed most interesting at the moment. Wirehead vs. Luz. Who was I rooting for? None of them. Nevertheless, I was morbidly eager to see these two horrific titans square off. Among us guards, we'd created an unofficial tier system, ranking each respective void in terms of the estimated threat that they posed, in comparison to each other. The tiers went as such: tornado weakest, tsunami, hurricane mid, earthquake, asteroid highest, imminent death, get the fuck out. They were also divided into subdivisions: high, low, mid, etc. With that said, Luz was around a high tornado while Wirehead was a mid tsunami. A glaring difference between them, but not enough that would make it impossible for Luz to win. "Wanna make a bet?" I asked Sandu, half jokingly. He chuckled. "You know my luck's cursed. But I guess if we don't make it out to here alive, then my debt's null anyway." Luz was more of a defensive combatant, so it wasn't surprising when Wirehead initiated the conflict. He twirled his bat around, still with remnants of guard flesh clinging onto it, in a near-mocking fashion at Luz. He was a delinquent. After all, Luz hardly reacted, of course. That's just the way he was. In response, he stepped forward, electricity flickering through his hands and up to his forearms. Wirehead followed suit, unleashing a big swing at Luz's head, which he managed to intercept with one of his forearms. Nevertheless, the wires still pierced his skin. Wirehead followed it up with a headbutt. This time it connected with the flesh side of Luz's face, slicing him up rather gruesomely. But despite his seemingly grievous injuries, he remained unwavering. That was the thing about Luz. He was incapable of feeling any pain. Like I said, his exact origins remained a mystery, but the one thing we knew about him for sure was the fact that he hailed from some kind of ancient clan residing in the Arctic Circle. In fact, he was the sole survivor of an incident that decimated his village, and he was hungry for revenge against the unknown force that did it. After taking the headbutt, Luz was now in striking range. He formed his fingers into an arrow shape and drove them into Wirehead's solar plexus before electrocuting his insides. Wirehead quaked in pain as he swung his bat in a frenzied rage, just about demolishing Luz's ribcage. No reaction from him, though. Instead, he took his other hand and wrapped it around Wirehead's neck. Any normal person would have succumbed to Luz's electrical shocks after a few seconds, but of course Wirehead was no normal person. Despite blood pouring out from chest wound and the skin on his neck beginning to bubble, he picked Luz up by the torso and slammed him over the steel railing. He fucking broke his back. Even without sound, the mental audio of a spine snapping reverberated throughout my mind. Unsurprisingly, Luz didn't bat an eye. Wirehead went in for the kill, tossing Luz's body onto the ground before smashing until it resembled nothing more than a mess of bloody pulp and broken bones. But somehow, he was still alive. Among the gruesome pile, I could see an eye blink. Once Wirehead had exhausted himself from his relentless swinging, Luz took his chance. Using his one arm that hadn't been smashed to bits, he crawled over and grabbed Wirehead by the foot before scaling himself up to his neck. Once there, he drilled his fist into Wirehead's forehead, utterly shredding his own hand in the process. In the end, it was worth the sacrifice. He was able to electrocute Wirehead's brain, finally causing the behemoth to drop. So, I guess he won, Sandu said. I guess. I had my own reservations about calling Luz's performance a victory. By the end of it, all of his limbs and his spine had been shattered, and not an inch of his body wasn't hosting a series of deep cuts. The good side of his face had also been chipped away to the skull, leaving only his eye and half his nose intact. And yet, he didn't move with a hint of desperation or concern, calmly crawling away from the scene using his one mangled hand. I could still see the current flowing through it as well, a telltale sign that he was ready to pick up another fight. Nice. Comeback victory, Sandu said. I don't see him making it far though, not as a tornado tier. Yeah, but we made all of that shit up. Not like it means anything, I responded. Truth be told, I was nearly rooting for Luz at the end there. Something about his resilience resonated with me, as bizarre as it may seem. I scanned the rest of the monitors. While Wirehead and Luz were squaring off, the undead Nazi had burnt Dijksek to a crisp. On another monitor, Morgie playing around with a void corpse that I recognized as Death's shadow. He chose his own name. 3 down, I muttered to myself. Fuck, we got a big one coming up, Sandu announced. I followed his eyes to a monitor near the bottom of the room. He was right. This one was going to be good. Standing at opposite sides of the kitchen were
Trench 6 a 190 cm, 330 lbs 150 kg.
And Senju 5, EA 177 cm, 148 lbs 67 kg.
Trench was a silent entity dressed entirely in ancient-looking deep-sea diving gear, except for the head, which remained without a helmet. However, you couldn't get a glimpse of its face regardless. That was due to the fact that his features were completely distorted, so much so that if you tried focusing on the details, all you were getting was a nasty migraine.
On top of that, he was invisible in person. Let me explain. If he were standing right in front of you, you wouldn't be able to see him. The only way to get a glimpse of him was through secondary means, cameras, mirrors, etc., which made him all the more dangerous. As for how he killed people, it was either by brute force using his monstrous strength, or B his death aura, as US guards have dubbed it. Similar to Dijksek's zone, once you were in his close vicinity, you'd feel an astronomical amount of pressure and get crushed on the spot, comparable to what you'd feel standing at the bottom of the ocean. But that's only if Trench wills it. Sometimes he'll turn the aura off and simply punch somebody's head off. For that reason, he was in the mid-hurricane tier. As for Senju, well, he was basically a psychotic, demon-possessed martial artist with supernatural levels of speed, strength, and agility. He apparently trained in the Wraith style, or the technique beyond human comprehension, whatever the hell those were supposed to mean. When he gets serious, his eyes will roll into the back of his head, and black veins will begin bulging out from underneath his skin. At that point, he'll be moving so fast that his motions become impossible to keep up with visually, and a single punch from him will be enough to completely vaporize a human head. But in all honesty, he's one of the least malicious voids out of the bunch. If you're weak like us guards, he won't even spare you a glance, granted that you stay out of his way. The only thing that he's really looking for are strong opponents to fight. But when he can't find one, he starts to get antsy. And then problems emerge. We've pegged him at a low hurricane. Can Senju even see Trench? Sandu asked. I guess so, I responded. The question was worth asking, but I wouldn't have been surprised if Trench's aura invisibility simply didn't work on him at all. That seemed to be the case, since Senju decided to strike first. He rushed forward at an unfathomable speed, directing what must have been hundreds of strikes in succession at Trench. However, none of them fazed the obscure diver. I could see Senju's lips curling into a psychotic grin at the fact. He certainly found what he was looking for. The floor beneath him cracked as his eyes turned white and his grotesque veins began bulging. If we couldn't see his strikes before, it was beyond impossible now. He rushed forward, unleashing a maelstrom of lightning-like punches, elbows, and kicks against Trench. This went on for about 5 seconds before he was stopped in his tracks. Trench had grabbed him by the throat, still not looking any worse for wear in the process. I could see Senju mouth something to the effect of what the fuck before he was tossed into a metal fridge. It certainly appeared as if Trench was too much of a tank for him to handle. Nevertheless, Senju got back up and cracked his shoulder into place while blood leaked from his mouth. And then he seemed to let out a shriek. Crazy fucker, I thought to myself. What the hell did it take for somebody to become like this? At that point, he'd seemingly given up on technique entirely. Instead, he grabbed a handful of kitchen knives and began chucking them at Trench. While none of them pierced the suit, one of them managed to stick in his distorted head, which evidently dealt some damage. Trench flinched, before taking the knife out and throwing it back at Senju, who in turn caught it effortlessly. At this point, he was howling in what I assumed was some kind of fucked up sadomasochistic jubilation. He'd found the weak point. Senju rushed back at Trench, knife in hand, before slashing away at its face. Spurts of vicious, dark blue blood stained the kitchen floor, along with Senju's own face. Soon enough, the knife snapped, and Trench threw a desperation punch at Senju's temple. He managed to block it with his forearm, although I could see his bones cracking from the impact. He leapt back as his arm hung limp to his side, dodging a follow-up haymaker. Throughout everything, a grin remained plastered on his face. His veins were bulging out so hard that I found it hard to believe they weren't going to completely burst altogether. With one arm, Senju lifted a metal table and swung it into the side of Trench's head, nearly taking it off in the process. He wasted no time, grabbing a large frying pan and pouncing at his incapacitated opponent, knocking them both over in the process. He then took a position atop Trench's body, furiously slamming the pan onto his face. Martial arts. I could hear Samu mutter. After what must have been 250 blows, the pan broke. On the ground, Trench's head had been obliterated no less than 50 strikes prior. Senju tossed the scrap metal aside and looked up at the ceiling, presumably screaming his lungs sore in sheer, combative delight. Well, looks like our tier system means fuck all, I chuckled.
Despite the morbid scene unfolding in front of us, Sandhu shared a laugh with me. We were at the point where the absolute absurdity and danger of the situation was beginning to fade from our senses. Hell, I suppose we were enjoying ourselves, as fucked up as that may sound.
We kept watching as Senju got up and stumbled around, evidently disoriented from both his injuries and successive fits of fighting spirit-induced rage euphoria. He took about 4 steps before his head exploded, throwing the two of us watching for quite the loop. Another figure stepped into the frame, whom we recognized as Satan Bot 6, 211 cm, 535 lbs, 243 kg. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine upon seeing him, somewhat snapping me back into reality. Despite his comical name, Satan Bot had to be one of the most frightening voids out there. I just couldn't understand what the fuck he was supposed to be. His body appeared to be robotic, but moved in ways that were too fluid for even the most sophisticated android, like legitimate metallic flesh. It was honestly maddening to look at. On top of that, he literally resembled the fucking devil himself. Reddish black scaly skin metallic shell, a mouth full of exposed, razor-like teeth, rectangular, slanted crimson eyes, a pair of large, mechanical wings, and a long tail ending in something that resembled a 3-pronged spear to boot. For whatever reason, he also had a rocket launcher atop his right shoulder and a Gatling gun connected to his left hand. No, these were not mechanical modifications. They were literally connected to his body.
He was unanimously considered one of the most dangerous voids residing in the chasm, rated at a high earthquake. Even if Senju was at his full strength, he wouldn't have stood a chance.
Oh shit, Sandu commented. I was hoping he didn't escape. Well, let's not worry about him for now, I said, turning my attention to another monitor. What my eyes landed on next was an utter massacre. Sitting atop a pile of guard bodies that must have eclipsed 6 feet was Hugo Wright, aka the brutal Bishop 6 at 189 cm, 200 lbs, 91 kg. Like his name indicated, he was dressed in a traditional vicar priest outfit. The only difference was the fact that the cross he wore around his neck was fashioned out of blades. The man himself had long, sweeping black hair and about 14 bags under both of his dead, blue eyes. It was unclear to us what his real motivations were. It's not like he really followed the rules of any religion on Earth, despite his outfit. He just went on long rants about the sin of natalism and the futility of existence and how to reach a state of sanctity. We must first reach a clean state, basically. He wanted to kill every sentient being on Earth, and then himself. He wasn't all talk, either. He was certainly strong. We rated him at a low hurricane. After praying to whatever fucked up deity he worshipped atop his pile of corpses, he slid down and began stalking the corridors for some more victims to fulfill his holy objective. Who he came across next couldn't have been more perfect. Kyle Silva, aka Vampire Cop 5, 175 cm, 176 lbs 80 kilograms. Kale was rather interesting, being that he was one of the most cooperative voids. In fact, he was the only prisoner that willingly turned himself in. His backstory was interesting as well, and of the few we actually knew about. He used to be a prolific, merciless Brazilian cop who patrolled the most dangerous parts of Rio. It was so much so that he earned a reputation amongst the criminal underground as the Reaper. But he was still only human. During one fateful mission, his entire unit was massacred during an ambush attack by about a dozen distinct gangs who were all unified under the same goal of taking him down. He was the only survivor, but was captured in the process. After being brutally tortured in a warehouse for about 5 hours, the lights suddenly went out. During this period of darkness, the only sounds entering his ears were those of carnage. Every single gang member was being obliterated by some unknown force. At the end of the bloodbath, he could hear footsteps slowly approaching him before a deep, raspy voice whispered something into his ear. "There's potential in you. Allow me to bestow you with an opportunity." He felt a sharp pain hit his neck before the hidden entity spoke to him again. "Fulfill your duty." And then he passed out. When he woke up, he found himself in his bed, with all the wounds from his torture session just about healed. All wounds except for one, a bite mark on his neck. His appearance had also changed drastically. Pale skin, dark eyes, and fangs. He'd heard about the stories, but could hardly comprehend that he'd become one himself. While he couldn't handle being exposed to the sun anymore, he found himself with superhuman strength and regeneration, which he used to brutalize criminals at night as a vigilante. However, it didn't take long for him to go too far. One night, he went into a frenzy, breaking into the house of a suspected rapist and killing everybody inside. Everybody, including the rapist's innocent mother and daughter. His resolve in regards to justice had never wavered, remaining strong no matter what he went through. For that reason, he could hardly live with guilt on his conscience and walked to the police station he used to work at, turning himself in to his former colleagues that all thought he was dead. Of course, the news spread quickly. That's when the CIA stepped in and transferred him over to the chasm. He put up no resistance. In fact, he deemed the chasm a place where he 100% belonged. Safe to say, he was a rather bizarre case. We still put him at a low hurricane, same as Hugo. On the monitor, I could see Kale's lips moving. Wanting to hear what he had to say, I began looking around to see if I could get some audio. It didn't take too long for me to find the volume control panel, which was located right under the middle desk. Thankfully, whoever set this weird place up took the liberty of labeling each switch with its respective monitor. I turned the volume up right in the middle of Kale's spiel. ... dangerous scum. I'm gonna have to dispose of you all before it's too late. Hugo's face remained expressionless. Scum. An apt description of the ones residing in this place. But I understand that you're also a man wrought with unforgivable sin. I'll treat you no differently, he responded. Kyle chuckled. Wouldn't expect you not to. He took a provocative fighting stance. Simon, Englishman, let's settle this. Hugo put a hand on his blade cross before muttering another prayer to himself. He looked up at Kale, his eyes now a deep crimson. The atrocities I commit are only in the pursuit of ultimate holiness. I hope you can understand that. Kyle grinned. Yeah, I get it. Crazy people are crazy. As he finished the sentence, he rushed forward in a quick blur, sinking his fangs into Hugo's neck. In turn, Hugo grabbed Kale's head and twisted, snapping his neck in what had to be the most gruesome manner feasible before plunging a fist into his chest. For the first time, Hugo grimaced. What's wrong with your heart, he asked, before retracting his hand, revealing severe burn marks. Kale twisted his head back into place before shooting Hugo a bloody grin. I couldn't tell you, buddy. They traded blows for a few more minutes, pummeling each other into oblivion. While Kale was certainly more skilled and had more tools at his disposal, Hugo possessed more raw power. Eventually, it came to a standstill. Kale had suffered upwards of 20 fatal injuries, forcing his regeneration abilities to the brink. Hugo was bleeding all over, had about 6 bone fractures, an eye gouged out and an ear ripped off. "You're pretty fucking annoying, aren't you?" Cale rasped out. Hugo bent over, coughing up a mouthful of blood. Likewise. In the meantime, their confrontation had drawn an audience. Coming in from an intersecting corridor was Infernal Gladiator 6 at 200 cm, 200 cm, 285 lbs, 129 kg. He was a high hurricane. Imagine an extremely buff zombie that was perpetually burning, clad in ancient gladiator gear. That was him. In one of his hands, he gripped a gigantic, flaming sword. In his other, he held 2 leashes, both holding respective voids at the neck, crawling at his feet like dogs straight from hell. One was the Freak 6 208 cm, 253 lbs, 115 kg, a slouching, humanoid monster with strange, flickering eyes and a grin that wrapped around its entire head. The other was the human-ish Centipede 6 at 193 cm, standing height 372 lbs, 169 kg, a centipede-like creature that had a vaguely human face covered in 6 eyes, with an iron muzzle obscuring the mouth area. It crawled on 10 colossal, veiny arms. They were both mid-tornado tier. Not incredibly powerful. They were merely simple, aggressive beasts that possessed nothing but primal bloodlust and strength that was comparable to 3 wild bears put together. For that reason, they were easily converted into disposable weapons by the much stronger and more intelligent gladiator. "Fucking hell," Cale said upon seeing the trio. "That's fucking disgusting." "Bloody abominations," Hugo added. "Nothing but creatures that stain this earth." They both looked at each other and nodded, an explicit sense of mutual understanding between them. I suppose that a few of the voids teaming up should have been inevitable. "Oh boy, this is heating up," I said, turning towards Sandu. He didn't respond at first, instead looking as if he were trying to focus on something that wasn't the screen. "What the hell's the matter?" I asked him. "I think there might be somebody else in here. Don't turn around. Just keep watching. Pretend like you didn't hear it," he replied, hardly above a whisper. It's not like I had to pretend. Hear what? I thought to myself. Nevertheless, I'd never sounded more serious. I turned my attention back to the monitors while forcing my ears to be alert. About 10 seconds later, I heard it. It was soft for sure. I wasn't surprised that I hadn't noticed it up until that point. Somewhere in the darkness behind us, somebody was definitely trying to contain a giggle. It was a job easier said than done. And honestly, was it even a good idea? In my head, I ran through the list of potential voids that could have been lurking behind us. Of course, none of them were really ideal. Especially not the rowdy clown, whose laugh sounded hauntingly similar to the one we were hearing behind us. And then we heard it again. Louder this time. I muttered a barely audible fucking response. Realistically, if it did turn out to be one of the voids, putting up some kind of resistance would have been pointless anyway. We were as good as done for. With that logic in mind, I turned my attention back to the monitors, hoping that whatever the hell was behind us would stay put for a bit longer. In the meantime, Hugo and Cale were about to fight the gladiator and his minions. "Hey Englishman," Cale said. "You regenerate quickly." Hugo sighed, stretching his neck out. "First of all, don't call me that. It's rather crass. And no, not much faster than the average man. But no matter. God has ordained me a holy commission. He won't let me die until I've fulfilled my duty." Cale just laughed. "You're a real piece of work, British boy. Let's see if your God helps us make it out of this." "You two aren't who I'm looking for," the gladiator bellowed, before releasing both leashes. "Take out the trash." The freak ran about 6 steps before having his face caved in and neck subsequently snapped by Hugo. In the meantime, the centipede began crawling towards Cale. "Who the fuck created this thing?" he asked, shuddering slightly. The centipede lifted itself up, swiping 2 of its arms at the visibly disturbed vampire. "Shit, don't touch me," he shouted, before kicking its face, removing its muzzle in the process. He regretted that decision instantly. The centipede had 4 or 5 rows of spike-like teeth, with a horde of flesh-covered tentacles squirming out from its mouth. One of them grabbed Kale by the leg, dragging him down. "God damn it," he shouted, attempting to squirm out of the appendage's grasp. Nevertheless, Hugo came to the rescue, turning the centipede's head into mush with one vicious stomp. He shot Kale a cold gaze. "Take his name in vain again, and our temporary alliance is over." Kale shook the tentacle remnants off of his leg, his face still utterly disgusted. Yeah, holy fucking shit, this is nasty." And then they both stared at the gladiator, who was grinning something malicious. "Congratulations. You two have earned the privilege of being my combat slaves." "I would literally rather fucking die," Kale responded. "I submit myself to God and God only. Diseases like you shall perish at his will," Hugo added. The gladiator drew his smoldering sword, which must have been the size of a person. "Then so be it," he roared. The two rushed him simultaneously, attempting to bury the burning menace with a flurry of quick strikes. But that wasn't the best idea. They couldn't even touch the gladiator without suffering from burns themselves. Kale sighed. "Some asshole just had to dig this fuck up, didn't they?" The gladiator stepped forward, unleashing a big swing that singed a few hairs off of Hugo's head. "Bastard," he shouted, before sending a hard cross at the gladiator, shattering his chestplate armor in the process. "You're pretty strong there, Britt. We just might win this one," Kale grinned. "Like I said, God will give me enough strength to overcome these trials." Hugo moved towards the gladiator with a seemingly unwavering resolve, his eyes shining a bright crimson. His face was wrought with such intense, stoic determination that I nearly forgot his ultimate goal was to commit global genocide, and began cheering him on. The gladiator sneered at the challenge, swinging his blade once again. This time, Hugo deflected it with an elbow, cracking the metal while doing so. He followed up by directing a flying hook kick at the gladiator's jaw, managing to rip it off completely. Kale followed up by biting into the gladiator's shoulder and tearing a large chunk off, burning most of his face in the process. "Ugh," he said, spitting out the charred, undead flesh. "Not my cup of tea." "Are you all right?" Hugo asked, staring at his scorched face. "Yeah, should heal up in no time." However, the gladiator was relentless, letting out a frenzied roar before bolting towards Kale. He managed to dodge most of the gladiator's blows, only taking the full brunt of his last punch. Still, that one blow was enough to form a deep, fleshy crater in his torso, while also sending him flying into the steel rail, causing it to bend. "Fuck," Kale stammered out, staring down at the unsightly wound. "Nope, that's not good. Gonna take longer to heal." Hugo exhaled. The situation has become bothersome. He went back after the gladiator, sending a ruthless barrage of strikes his way. There was an evident skill gap between the two voids, with Hugo landing about 90% of his attacks. On the other hand, the gladiator only managed to land 3 or 4 clean hits of his own. Nevertheless, each of one of them dealt far more damage than any of Hugo's. After about a minute of fighting, Hugo's left arm was completely mangled, his right rib cage had been shattered, and the entire right side of his face was burnt. The gladiator had also taken a fair amount of damage, but not nearly enough to even slow it down. Kale groaned as he attempted to insert himself back into the fight. But that task wasn't an easy one. He could hardly move with his torso just about completely destroyed. "I suppose this must be my final trial," Hugo said, somewhat solemnly. "What the hell are you talking about?" Kale asked, still groaning. And then, for the first time since we began watching, Hugo smiled. "God wills it." Using his good arm, Hugo removed the upper section of his robe, revealing a pale, mutilated, scar-ridden body beneath. He muttered another prayer before looking up at the ceiling, tears now swelling up in his eyes. "Thank you," he muttered. Along with his eyes, the scars on his body suddenly began glowing a deep red. "Tricks won't be enough," the gladiator thundered, before swinging his blade at Hugo's neck. I don't think that I managed to catch exactly what happened next. However, I was certain that I was about to see a head rolling. Instead, the gladiator's blade shattered into what looked like a million pieces. At first, I didn't even notice the gaping hole in the gladiator's chest. How did you? The gladiator was interrupted by his neck being brutally cranked to the side. As the flaming behemoth dropped, so did Hugo. By then, Cale had regenerated to the point of being able to walk. He stumbled over to the near comatose bishop. "What the fuck was that?" he asked, half grinning. I detached myself from my earthly limitations, an egregious sin, but I needed to fulfill my holy mission. Well, shit. That's pretty cool, I guess. Not your psycho mission, but the whole detachment thing. He held out his hand in an attempt to help Hugo get up. However, Hugo shook his head in response. "This is far as I go, not something I can recover from. I only have judgment to face now." "Oh, shut the fuck up," Cale said, picking up Hugo's limp body and lumbering it over his shoulder. "We'll find you some painkillers, and then you'll be back on your feet in no time." "Why would you help me?" Hugo asked. "You understand what I'm after, don't you? My ideals." "Well, I don't think I could have handled the gladiator on my own, so I guess I owe ya." "You crazy fuck," he looked over at Hugo and grinned. "And who knows, maybe you'll learn something. Yeah, there's a lot of scum in the world, but there's also a lot of beauty. We don't have to destroy it all." "That's..." Hugo passed out before he could finish his thought. Still carrying him over his shoulder, Cale took off running down another corridor. I did a quick sweep of the other monitors. Satan Bot had taken out 2 more lower-tier voids, while Morgie was engaged with a high hurricane void named the Mechanic 6L196 cm, 270 lbs 122 kg. Like the name suggested, he was a large, burly man in a mechanic outfit that enjoyed obliterating skulls with blunt tools. Real ruthless guy. On another monitor, the undead Nazi had just finished slicing the shit out of the devil nurse, who was a mid-tsunami. So that's 12 down, I thought. 20 left. The shit show wasn't anywhere near done. "Check it out," Sandhu said. "There's still 4 voids who haven't escaped yet." Sure enough, he was right. First off, there was the Titan 15 of 475 cm, 1,438 lbs 652 kg. A colossal entity with destructive capabilities that were nigh impossible to deal with. It was humanoid, with an immensely muscular frame further accentuated by the fact that there wasn't an ounce of fat on its entire body. Its harder than steel skin was reddish and cracked all over, with a road map of razor-like veins bulging out at every square inch. And then there was the face. It had 6 sets of glowing blue eyes and a mouth full of fangs with exposed gums that were caustic to the touch. His holding cell, if you can even call it that, was a bit more fortified than the rest. I'm under-exaggerating, of course. It was fortified to goddamn hell. No electronic locks connected to a central system either, which is probably what caused the breach to begin with. Good thing too, he was a low asteroid. The next one up was the Warden 8, a 261 cm, 435 lbs 197 kg. Ironically enough, this guy apparently used to run a prison of his own. What kind of prison that might be was beyond me. He had pale white skin, shadow-like eyes and long, slick-back silver hair. His trench coat was long and perpetually bloody, sweeping the floor as he walked. I've heard stories about the guy. Supposedly, he killed upwards of 700 prisoners during a breach at his prison, managing to come out unscathed from a devastating explosion afterwards. He was as dangerous as a void could get without being considered asteroid tier, being a high earthquake. Funnily enough, his cell was wide open, with guard bodies and destroyed mech suits littering the space. But instead of getting up and walking out, he simply sat, expression devoid of anything at all, like it usually was. Obviously, he was up to nothing good. The next one was quite the doozy. The strongest void in the entire chasm, in fact. It went by a simple moniker, the Calamity of Earth, or just the Calamity for short. Its gender was unknown, height and weight unknown. Appearance unknown to everybody except for the top officials overseeing this entire fucking operation. Hell, we didn't even know where it was kept. The only thing we had to monitor was a simple panel containing 3 lights. Green safe. Still contained. Yellow breakout in progress. Evacuate immediately. Red breached. Too fucking late. What did we know about this thing? Nothing, save for the fact that a breach would most likely result in a global catastrophe. Of course, it was a high asteroid. The only high asteroid, in fact. And then there was the last still captive void. But unlike the 3 overpowered monsters I've already talked about, he was a lot different. The Kid 5 at 168 cm, 142 lbs, 64 kg. As his name implies, the kid was just that, a kid. From his appearance, he couldn't have been much older than 16. 17 at most. The only thing we knew about him was that he apparently had extraordinary, undisclosed abilities. Abilities he used to slaughter his entire village back in Kerala, India. But who the hell knows what actually happened? To me, and nearly every other guard, he just seemed like your average, meek teenager. In fact, we rarely ever exercised caution around him. Unlike the rest of the voids in here, he just did as he was told, always with this incredibly sullen expression on his face. I suppose that I can't blame him, given the circumstances. We didn't even bother putting a threat level on him. Nevertheless, we were instructed to keep him there. There's a lot of stuff going on here in the chasm that US guards don't quite understand. I make no reservations about that. I know for a goddamn fact that not everything we're not doing any saintly work here. Do a lot of voids in here deserve to be locked up? Not even. They deserve to be wiped off the face of the earth. I never understood why we bothered holding the more malicious ones, using taxpayer money just to keep them alive. And then there were the ones who I wasn't quite sure belonged here at all. Did they even do anything wrong? Who knows? But one thing was for sure. They were different. Exceptional, I guess. The subjects of state curiosity. I always tried suppressing these thoughts. I mean, who the hell was I? Just some random fucking guard, not some arbiter of morality. Still, fuck it. This is not the time. So let's see. What happened next? I turned to face a random monitor, trying to take my mind off of the kid. I caught what appeared to be the middle of a fight, with the 2 combatants being Jack the Ripper, 6'185 cm, 170 lbs, 77 kg, the infamous serial killer. Apparently, he'd performed some arcane ritual while on death's door that granted him an extended lifespan and superhuman strength in exchange for what was left of his already dwindling humanity. He hardly resembled a human when we caught him. With a mouth full of sharp, rotting teeth, eyes sunken beyond reason, and a face riddled with cuts, burns, and various infections, he was quite the sore sight to behold. At that moment, he was once again on death's door. The person who put him there. Bela Voklin, aka the Bloody Painter 5 165 cm, 122 lbs, 55 kg. Despite looking more or less like a normal woman, she was a brutal assassin that wasn't too concerned with the aftermaths of her jobs. After killing her target, she'd paint a bloody picture on the walls. Sometimes she'd supplement her art with a few organs. She wasn't incredibly strong, but that didn't matter all too much. She had this obscure ability where she could summon blades out of thin air at the tips of her fingers, and then use some Esper-like ability to shoot them off in rapid succession, almost at a machine gun-like rate of fire. She had no problems reducing her targets to mincemeat. The ones she really disliked, that is. When we finally captured her, she maintained that she only killed the ones that really deserved it. However, any chance of appeal, not that there was a chance to begin with, was shattered when she punctured the throats of 4 guards. She still claims that it was an accident to this day. Do I believe her? Well, it's about 50/50 with me. Like I said, she had Jack on the ropes, with what must have been over 100 blades planted firmly within the killer's body, including both of his eyes. Still, he had yet to give up as he swung Wirehead's bat. He must have picked it up blindly and wildly around him. Bella wasn't unscathed herself, though. It looked as if she'd taken a couple of pretty bad hits to her ribs and thigh. In addition to that, she had a gnarly bite mark on her hand. Nevertheless, She smiled as she pointed her finger like a pistol at the frenzied Jack. "Profit or Dale Enfer," she said, before blasting the killer to shreds, finally ending his grim legacy. Once she was done with that, she let out a loud sigh, clutching her ribs and wincing in pain. Unlike most of the other voids, she wasn't capable of taking too much punishment. After walking for a bit, she came across Luz. While still badly mangled from his confrontation with Wirehead, he was walking again. I didn't even know that he could regenerate that quickly. The two stared at each other for about half a minute before Bella stuck out her hand and smiled. It was a risk, for sure. But while Luz didn't reciprocate the smile, he cooperated, accepting the handshake without electrocuting her. Another team up, and one that I wouldn't necessarily have expected. I did another quick sweep of the monitors. Morgie had taken out the mechanic, although he was limping now, and his next fight wasn't going to be an easy one. He was a few steps from coming across Satan Bot. In the meantime, and funnily enough, the undead Nazi was about to square off with the sadistic Soviet 6XO 187 cm, 215 lbs 98 kg, low earthquake tier. Instead of being zombified like the Nazi he was, more mechanical. More specifically, he was about 60% robotic, with his human bits slowly beginning to rot away. The surgeon was engaged in a bloody duel with Spider-Man 6 at 206 cm, 225 lbs 102 kg. Unlike Peter Parker, this guy was basically just a large tarantula with human skin and a half-human head. Kale and Hugo were in the medical center, with the former tending to the latter's wounds. I thought about everything for a second, trying to run the numbers through my head. There were 4 more voids who had definitely escaped that I hadn't yet seen on any of the monitors. But I was really only concerned about 2 of them. You see, within the chasm, there were 4 asteroid tier voids in total. Only 2 of them were still contained. The problem was rather obvious. Beyond that, there were now 14 voids dead. 4 who still haven't joined the fight. 14 currently active. All 4 asteroids still in play, 3 high earthquakes as well. TFVNH likely on their way. Holy fuck, I thought to myself. The real fight hasn't even started yet. A bout of sudden, raucous laughter nearly gave me a heart attack. I looked at Sandhu, but his face was dead serious. That meant... shit. With everything that was going on, I completely forgot about the elephant in the room. But sure enough, they were finally ready to reveal themselves. As footsteps began emanating from the darkness behind us, I braced myself for whatever horrific entity we were surely about to encounter. But instead of that, it was an unfamiliar guy that looked to be in his mid-20s with messy, dirty blonde hair dressed in a Hawaiian shirt and khaki shorts. He was probably around 5 on 178 cm, 130 lbs 59 kg soaking wet. What the hell, Sandhu said upon seeing him. The man continued laughing as he strolled towards us. Oh, man, he blurted out in between chuckles. There's shit in both of your pants right now, isn't there? Don't lie to me. Well, the joke's gone on long enough. Who the fuck are you, Sandhu asked, sounding somewhat agitated. The man put his arms up in an ostensibly defensive manner. Relax. I'm just an observer here, but his bloodshot eyes seemed to bulge out as they wandered over to the monitors. It looks like the preliminaries are over. Time for the good shit. I'm so sorry. I forgot to introduce myself. The man stepped towards us with a gaze that I can only describe as volatile. Perhaps, in the moment, he had no ill intent. But there were volcanoes behind his eyes. Volcanoes that looked ready to erupt at any damn point. For that reason, I found myself slowly backing away. But not Sandhu. For whatever reason, he stood his ground, facing the strange man without reservation. I suppose it also helped that he was 6 at 193 cm with a considerably larger frame. The name's Adrian Nyquist, he said, his voice nearly shaking with some kind of obscure excitement. He held out his hand, but neither of us bothered with the niceties of the introduction. He sighed. What? Is it me? He lifted his shirt collar, taking a whiff. Oof, you gotta shower more, Adrian, and then he started laughing again. But can you blame me? I've been busy. Who the fuck are you? Sandhu insisted. And don't just tell us your name again. Okay, Adrian said, smirking. Big guy. Scary stuff, really. What'd you bench? 3 plates and a bit. Sandhu opened his mouth again, but was interrupted. It's fine though. I'll go ahead and explain myself. I mean, the whole situation is kinda weird. Yup, I responded. Just kind of. Adrian sat down on the floor and let out a big puff of air. I don't really want to go too in depth here. I don't enjoy talking about myself, so let me drop the bomb on you first. I caused the breach. I nearly swallowed my tongue. What? What the fuck do you mean? I meant what I said. I let all the prisoners out. But, what? How I stammered out. He tilted his head back and groaned, before pretending to type on an invisible keyboard. Just a little hacking, man. Nothing crazy. And they say that you'll never use the skills you learn in school in real life. PFFT. Hacking, I responded in disbelief. But why? Well, that's where it does get a little crazy. Now, have you ever hopped dimensions? Have I ever fucking what? Alright? I see you're uninitiated with the concept. Well, unlike hacking some corny lock system, the logistics there really do get complicated. I'll admit that I don't 100% understand it myself, but I understand it just enough to have some fun. I was at a complete loss. I'm a jumper. That's what they call us, he chuckled somewhat goofily. Still a novice, but at least I'm out there doing it. Living life, you know. Anyway, the multiverse is massive, obviously. A lot of crazy worlds out there just waiting to be explored. But, he paused. I made a mistake last month. You see, I was watching some brutal big stakes fighting tournament called the Evisceration Championships on a planet called the Hellscape. Real fucked up place, but drugs laws are mostly unenforced there, so you know. It's alright, I guess. Anyway, I'm up in the stands. 12th row, just blitzed out of my fucking mind on Astro Coke. It's like regular Coke if regular Coke was actually good. He blew his nose into a disgusting handkerchief. But sometimes you make some bad decisions when you're juiced. I guess school taught us something else, huh? Long story short, I made a deal with some fucking sketchy intergalactic gang leader named Bones the Fourth that I'd provide him a fighter that would guarantee him a win for the next tournament. But obviously, I was just talking shit. Not sure why the guy believed me, an Astro Cokehead, of all people. He burst out laughing again. I'll never understand the rich. Okay, I responded, barely comprehending what I'd just been told. Assuming that what you just said is all true, and that you're not completely fucking bonkers, why don't you just tell the guy that you don't have a fighter? Well, Adrian made a whoopsie gesture with his hands. The guy paid up front, a metric fuckton of intergalactic